to episode 49 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slawinski.
And I'm Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't find time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. Show notes. It's the holiday season, so please buy our stuff and support other developers whose work you also enjoy.
Oh, a selfless bit of Christmas cheer with which to start the podcast.
What are you playing?
I'm playing Watch Dogs 2 still. I'm not playing much of it because obviously we've been pretty busy this week, which I'm sure we'll be getting into later. But yeah, I'm having a good time with it still. I still think it's great. I'm playing it without using guns. That's the rule I keep using. And
informing others of using as well.
It's very important. Don't use guns. If you don't use guns, it's a really cool open world puzzle game. I assume if you use guns, it feels a lot like a lot of other games. So it's not an ethical or moral thing. It's more interesting.
So now, I think I may have touched on this slightly before, but what happens when you don't use guns?
You are forced to sneak. So you're pretty weak. The key thing is if you're not using guns, it's very hard to take out baddies. So you're using traditional sneaking. You're bopping people on the back of the head in classic stealth game fashion in all stealth games except Volume. And then you have gadgets and gizmos, who's its and what's its galore. Thingamabobs. You've got
20.
That's right. That's the level of discourse people expect from podcasts. But yeah, no, it's cool. It opens the game up. It becomes about navigating spaces, using your environment, using all the hacking mechanics. So yeah, it just I think it opens up the game and makes it about the things that clearly the designers were most excited about. I
think another thing for this, what you playing. Is what aren't you playing?
I'm not playing Dishonored 2 yet. I really want to. I'm really excited to. It's been sat on. I bought Watch Dogs 2 and Dishonored on the same day, and I'm trying desperately to stop playing more than one game at a time because I find that I start playing one game and I'll stop playing the other, and it's always a shame. So yeah, I'm gonna get to it.
Do you have any interest in Final Fantasy? Which
not
is
even a little bit.
Not even a little bit.
I've tried. I can. For me, they're in the same pile as Bethesda RPGs. I respect them. I see that they're good. Honestly, please don't email me. I can see that they're good, but I bounce off them.
It's not your thing.
I try Final Fantasy every couple of years and get about an hour in and go, no, this isn't for me. I don't know what it is. The story doesn't click for me. The gameplay doesn't click for me. Nothing does. But obviously, I respect them from afar.
Any other games in your current back catalog that you're not able to get to at the moment? Because I feel I've only been gone a week, but I feel like I've been gone a month at this point.
That's more to do with your hatred of London, right?
Oh, that's another segment.
But yeah, no, I think. Well, I had a bit of a because I managed to get through Titanfall, got through Call of Duty, so I had a good early year, and a lot of the big AAA things I'm looking forward to got the usual kind of got delayed to the start of next year. So like Horizon Zero Dawn, which I'm super excited about.
It did.
It did. But in a way, I needed the time, so I'm fine with that. How about you? What are you playing?
Nothing.
Nothing because you're in a different country with a console.
Yeah, and there's no television in my room.
It's weird. We're sat in your room right now, and there is no television, and I don't know where I'm meant to be looking. I don't know where the front of the room is.
You don't realize how much the television is the focal point.
It's the fireplace, right?
Right.
It's like 2016. Yeah. It's weird.
Because I know exactly where to sit in your flat, right? Like it's either at the couch or at the dining room table that's right behind the couch with the chair slightly
aimed at the television. Yes, because we're civilized, and that's what you do. You point your chairs at the TV. That's how society works.
And now it's time for what's going on at the studio. And what is going on at the studio is don't try to move to another country, folks. Just
stay where you are.
It's been a week. I've been on the ground a week. I've gotten a phone and not much else.
I feel like we covered the phone on the last podcast, right?
We did.
We did that. We got our product placement, and that was within hours of landing. You had a phone,
right? and within a week, I don't seem to be able to get much else. And now to be clear,
no, okay. Go on.
To be clear, legally I can. So before the junior lawyer team starts sending in,
Junior lawyer team.
Yeah. Team junior lawyer.
Team junior lawyer.
Team junior immigration attorneys. Start saying I am legally allowed to. It's just the system seems to be in a it's cool to come here, but if you want to stay here, there's some things that we're going to ask you to do that are questionable slightly.
And they are very cyclical, aren't they? It's very chicken and egg. You need piece of paper A, but the only way to get piece of paper A is to have B. But in order to get B, you must have already obviously got piece of paper A.
Right.
Yeah. I would say I think you're being a bit down on yourself and the amazing things you've achieved this week. I think you have narrowed down. I think you could definitely see this. This is very much the pre-production week. I think you've zeroed in where you want to live. We've definitely zeroed in on some places where we want to set up potentially the office and do that kind of thing.
And you've expanded your ideas on where to put the office.
I definitely had an image in my head of what we were doing at the start of the week, and I would say that that's definitely shifted, largely based on where you're looking at, the kind of area you want to live in, and just from conversations and because we've been looking into it. So I while I agree with you, like obviously tangible outcomes, it's not been an amazing week for those, but I do feel that both of us have a better idea of what we want to do going forward.
I think I've talked about my dogs.
Going forward, listen to me. Some kind of arsehole.
I think I've talked about Shepherd, my adorable. I mean, frankly, if you follow me on Twitter at Slowinski, you will see plenty of pictures.
There's more
of
pictures
Shepherd.
of Shepherd on your Twitter than there are of you, right?
Yes. So I love my boy, and it kind of hurts being told over and over and over again that he's kind of the reason I can't get an apartment.
It's weird, isn't it? I was surprised by this because I'm not a pet owner and I don't even like to be near a pet generally. I'm not an animal person at all. But it's a real barrier in London.
Yep.
Did not know that until seeing someone try and get through those hoops. But yeah, it's been an absolute nightmare. We've gone into some places that have had like signs in the windows. We do not let
no dogs allowed.
But not just like on a flat by flat basis, but like in terms of literally like we will not let to you if you have an animal.
Yep.
Weird.
So yeah,
any ideas from the community about how to get a place in London for rental with a dog?
Do you want to know the answer that I've received from many of the community?
Don't tell anyone.
Yep.
Lie.
Yep.
Cheat.
Yep.
Be dishonest.
Yep.
But that's not in your makeup, Alexander.
It really isn't.
Alexander doesn't do lying.
I desperately try to avoid it at all costs. Especially as
Shepherd's hard to hide as well. I don't think he's not a subtle dog, is he?
Well, no,
all his awesomeness
because he wants to say hi to you and be like, "I'm so
your friend.
I'm so cute. Look at me. I want to be your friend," and that's not gonna work. So yeah, and the worst in the really. And this is definitely for anyone ever moving to London, or maybe this is the same in other cities. Definitely emphasize to the real estate brokers that yes, you have a pet, and no, don't call me for an appointment until you've confirmed that the pet is allowed.
Because you've had a few places where they've taken you around, you've looked at it, you've fallen in love, you've been like, this is where I want to be.
Put down an offer.
And then no dogs.
Nope. And then no dogs allowed.
Which is it seems like a waste of everyone's time, really.
Yeah.
It seems cruel.
Yeah.
Almost. I shouldn't have paid all those estate agents to do that to you. It's incredibly unfair of me.
No, I mean...
I thought it was funny when I started doing it, but now it just seems...
I mean, if this has been your...
It's been an elaborate ruse on my part.
If this has been your passive-aggressive way to keep me in the States...
That's it.
At arm's length, congratulations. You have achieved everything you have set out to do.
Also, your phone contract is cancelled tomorrow.
Whee!
1, 2, 3. I want to thank you for reading the freedom mail again. Thank you for reading the freedom mail again.
Hey again, Mike and Alexander. I recently finished developing a game in Unity and put it on itch.io. So, for those who don't know, what is itch.io?
itch.io or itch.io, depending on how you pronounce it. But yeah, it's a I don't actually know. That sounded like I was being aloof. I genuinely don't know how it's meant to be pronounced. I've never said it out loud before, as is often the case with the internet. It's an online store for indie games, and a really cool one at that. Very easy to get onto, very straightforward. Good people running it. Yeah, I've got nothing but respect for those guys. Great.
So I'm about to start development on my next game in collaboration with a friend. I've started prototyping some ideas in Unity, but I remembered when you guys said that the last time I wrote into the show about how creating games in a new and upcoming engine is probably a good idea. I wanted to give Unreal a try, but there's also Amazon Lumberyard, which recently caught my attention. I'm not sure what engine to try next, so I'm curious to know what your opinions are on Lumberyard, if you guys are familiar with it at all. Would you guys recommend I try developing with it, even though it's so new? I've had some conversations with other devs. They seem to think developing with Lumberyard is a gamble right now. Also, I just finished listening to podcast episode 48, and I'm curious to know if you guys were serious about including people's Twitter handles. If you were, then could you be so kind?
I don't feel this part should be read out.
Which is at no. I said it. Maybe
I know the request. I mean, so magician_arcana.
Yeah, I post progress screenshots from time to time of whatever game I'm working on, which is a good thing to do.
That is a very good.
That is a very good thing to do because when someone looks you up, first thing they're going to look at is your Twitter, and so the second thing they're going to do is look if you're posting dev stuff or just starting something. Anyway, I also have a link to my itch.io account there, but if it was a joke, then please just ignore this part of my email. I understand that including all of your listeners' Twitter handles might be asking for too much. Zach, we did it for you.
We did, Zach. I'm looking forward. I'm going to check that out after the podcast. I'm not allowed to fiddle with my phone during the podcast.
So now we've been asked about Lumberyard before. We're going
Yes.
to take the exact same stance we took that time. Is we don't know. We don't deal in it.
Correct.
But you have talked about with Thomas specifically. You were there very early on in the Unity.
I was. I wasn't there right at the start, so I think it was. So Thomas was Unity 3, so it had been around, but that was really the point where Unity was trying to go, beyond the Mac, to become a real contender in terms of being an engine. Up to that point, it had been used for very few games, and generally was used more as an artist's tool, a way of making visualizations and cool stuff in runtime. But it was just kind of coming into its own as a legitimate game engine, and they were good people. So yeah, I've definitely been there kind of towards the start of an engine before, and it seems like Lumberyard has a similar kind of. It's a similar stage in its development. It's a tough one. There's lots of pros and cons. So obviously people are right when they say it's a gamble. That's a big one. You've not seen that engine used for lots of games, so it's very hard for you to gauge, is this an engine that can be used to make cool games? Can you point to anything which demonstrates, tech demos can be not misleading. That implies, a negative intention on the part of the people doing it. But often, because they are just small chunks of game, there might be something that they're not showing you because no one's thought of it yet, or no one's kind of come into that problem. Also, your game and the specific game you want to make might not make sense in that engine. It might be that someone else has tried to do a game like that and failed, or has...
See, I always found that part about engines fascinating because I never quite understood what that meant. When it's an engine, so is it designed for something specific? What does it mean when someone says oh, the engine wasn't designed for that? And then because that's how you usually get the coder who's I'm going to make an engine from the ground up, and then everyone laughs at them.
So, it used to be that engines were very specific to their use cases. So, Unreal Engine, for example, was really good at making first-person shooters, and you had to work quite hard to make it do other things.
And so was the Source as well.
Yes, yeah. And all that meant, it didn't mean that those engines couldn't do anything they wanted to, but the amount of work you had to do and the amount of stuff you had to add to that engine in order to get it to do what you wanted was difficult. That has definitely shifted since then, and now with Unity, Unreal, and I suppose probably Lumberyard as well, they're built in a more general way. They're built in a way that allows you to make any kind of game you want. even though that said, there are limitations to both, and by making an engine that kind of can do lots of different things, sometimes you kind of constrain its ability to do one thing amazingly well. So a lot of games that push the technology or do something that is kind of uncommon will need to be their own engine. So two examples that come to mind are Gratuitous Space Battles, which is a 2D shooter by our friend Cliff, and that needs a ridiculous number of spaceships on screen at once. So for him, it made sense to build an engine because it's gratuitous. So for him, it made sense to build an engine because he needed an engine that just was really good at drawing lots and lots of spaceships and explosions on screen at once. And that's, he's a very good programmer, so he was able to do that. Another example is No Man's Sky from Hello Games. Lots of requirements of procedural generation, but also of loading and generating stuff on the fly and all that stuff. If they tried to do that with an existing engine, that might have been more tricky than what they were able to do in that game. The short version is for folks like me who are maybe not as great programmers, and maybe folks like the writer who is an earlier stage as well. It might make sense, Zach, right? It might make sense for Zach to use an engine that's already out there and already being used for the kind of things that he wants to make, and piggyback on that success. And yeah, one of the problems with a new engine is you've not seen those people do those things yet. So unless your game is very much like something that you've seen in CryEngine before, because it's based on CryEngine, I believe, or it's something that is
Lumberyard is.
Yeah, so it's something that if it's a mechanic or a style of game or a look of game that you've seen already done in that engine, maybe that's useful. But I would guess that there's probably a lot of unknowns. The obvious upside to it, though, is that there's a lot of willingness for it to support you from the engine people,
and that's what I find fascinating here is the potential of support. But I also love one of the concepts that seems to come up on the show a lot is the cycles of the industry, and he refers to Unreal as a new engine.
Isn't that amazing?
And I and Zach, I know what you mean when you say that.
He's totally right. He's totally right. It's coming back.
But it's this is certainly something we've discussed, that Unreal was this thing 10 years ago,
the game engine,
the thing.
Yeah.
And went away, and now it's coming back, and we're hearing from students that that's what they're learning in again, and they're starting to come into the field, which is the thing that we saw Unity do 10 years ago, where it was just snuck its way in there through students.
Schools are a great way of getting these engines to uptick, and that means that yes, at different points in time, different studios have different attitudes. It's true of platforms, consoles, it's true of engines, it's true of everything.
And what I can say about Unreal is from an infrastructure standpoint that, Epic knows what it's doing in terms of promotion. So when you take on something like Unreal, and this will lead into your support statement, when you take on something like Unreal and you make something that is innovative with their engine or shows off their engine in a really good way, they get supportive, and we'll certainly take note of that. So yeah, continue on with support.
Yeah, so I mean, and there's they will support you more based on it's like anything, it's scarcity. So if there's lots of people making awesome, amazing stuff with an engine, there's less of a reason for the people who make the engine to kind of support and help. And that support can be marketing, it can even be financial, putting money into projects, or definitely giving access to platforms, various different ways that these engine companies can help. So my assumption would be with Lumberyard, not so much stuff made in it yet. They're looking for great showcases. So anyone who's making interesting stuff with their engine, that could absolutely be something that they are willing to help with. You're probably going to find that their rates are going to be super low, that they're going to be incredibly eager to get people into the platform. Unity has been out and around for a long time, and great people at Unity, and they do awesome events and do great stuff, but they have a raft of games. So getting Unity's attention, if you don't have kind of a relationship going back many years, is probably a lot harder. Unreal, as you say, are back and they're plucky, but they have different things that they want to push with their engine. So, for example, a big thing with Unreal, obviously, is that graphical fidelity and that kind of amazing resolution and artwork that they always put front and center. if your game's not kind of pushing in that direction, maybe it's not so exciting for Unreal. Lumberyard is very much keying into the kind of the online game kind of community and all that stuff. So maybe if your game fits that, then there's an opportunity there. So while it's useful to think of engines as software and as a piece of technology you're using for your game, don't stop thinking of them as companies and people who have their own objectives as well as that. So you can absolutely find ways to kind of travel in those circles and get the most out of that as well.
Yeah. Companies are made of people, and people have objectives.
But companies aren't people.
We disagree there. Hey, time traveler Alexander and maker of things Mike.
Nice.
I put that wrong way around for fun. I have a question about character shadows in first and third person. Ooh, this is going to be a technical one.
Roll up your sleeves.
So non-technical people, stick around. It's still an interesting question.
Okay,
I've heard that if you make a shadow of a player character, it has to be in third person, as it's very hard to make the character shadow in first person. So what needs to be done? If the shadow is to be made, then an invisible to the player third person view needs to be generated and placed where the feet would be when viewing through first person, so looking natural. I'm not a dev, so sorry if it doesn't make sense, but is this the case? Is it hard to make shadows of the player in first person? But also, my Twitter handle is SPAZLD Rust. That's
Spazzled Rust.
Spazzled Rust. So if that can be added to the end of the show, don't worry, I'm not actually expecting it to be, but we did it anyway.
We've already done it.
Warm regards, Pierre.
Hey, Pierre.
Okay, so
yes,
if I understand his question correctly, he's asking if in a first-person view, because what is actually being created there... Actually, no, you take it. You take from this point.
So the answer is no, you don't have to do it the way you suggested. But actually, what's interesting about the shadow problem is there are lots and lots of different ways to do it.
Okay.
So shadows in games don't work like shadows in real life. The way a shadow obviously is generated in real life is it's an absence of light. You shine a light on something blocks that light gets around the object but doesn't get through it. The problem with that is that's super expensive to actually render that at runtime, because you have to be running all of those little light beams across. It's called ray tracing, and ray tracing, outside of some very cool experiments, is not something that you can realistically do at runtime.
And when you say expensive, you mean it just takes a lot of
graphics processing to get that done. It's how I think it's still how most animated movies are made, and that's why they take hours and hours per frame to render a Disney movie, say, something like Frozen. But we can't do that. We haven't got that luxury. So all shadows in games are lies. All shadows you see in games are a trick. So what they actually do is it's more like stenciling. It's you essentially draw these shadow textures and then you stick them on the ground. You don't add light, you add shadows. Now that can be done in a few ways. For lights that are static, so we're sat in a room here with lights that are not swinging around, they're pretty locked in place. You can do something called baking, where you effectively render all your shadows nice and early and then just wrap that texture around your world. So you draw shadow on and you know that shadow's going to stay still, and it's great. There's also obviously real-time shadows, which are great, which are where you're doing those calculations at runtime, but that's quite expensive, and they're going to be lower quality shadows. Those are what you use if the light or the thing you're lighting are moving. So if you've seen it in a million games.
And when you say a lower quality shadow, you mean like it's not the outline of the character, but it's like, almost Photoshoppy.
It's just lower resolution. Yeah. So it's your kind of, with all of this, it's always an emulation, because you can't save with the bake, you can't save an image that's so massive that you could get your nose right up in there and it would look amazing. So you're always lying, but there's ways you lie efficiently. So that's what you use if you've got a
That's been my week in a nutshell, by the way.
If you lie efficiently, it's so true. So yeah, use that if your light's moving or if your object's moving. Now, obviously, the object that moves most in a video game is you. So how do you solve the shadow of the player problem?
How do you take a cloud and pin it down?
That's two. We've done two musical theatre jokes in this. Musical movies rather than musical theatre, but I'm sure there's been stage. Sound of Music, was that a stage show? Mm-hmm. It was.
Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Okay, and I'm pretty sure there's a Little Mermaid musical somewhere in the world. No, there wasn't
there?
There
is. There totally was, yeah. Aladdin is playing right now in London, by the way.
Wasn't it the chap? This is going off.
You didn't take me.
What's that?
You didn't take me.
To what?
To Aladdin.
I do want to see Aladdin. Anyway.
You'll never have a friend like me.
So, how do you render shadow of a first-person character? The first question is, do you want to? And the reason I ask, do you want to, is it weird to see a shadow of your character moving around the world when you can't see your own feet, you can usually see your own hands in a first-person shooter, but you can't see your body, so is it weird to see a shadow on a wall? That's question one. Some games do it, some games don't. But the specific question here is, how do you get a shadow? So there's a few different ways. One way we used to do it in the old days of like PS2 was you would literally have a black circle, a blurry black circle, and you put it on the ground below the player character.
Right, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah. That's your super fake. That's super cheap to do. It worked. We did it. It wasn't graceful. It definitely wasn't believable, but it
was immersive.
Well, it worked. What that was most useful for was if you had a game where you had a jumping character, it allowed the player to gauge how high in the air they were because they were different from the shadow. That's the main reason we did it. But obviously you're probably not doing that now unless you're making something for mobile or something like that. So the next question becomes what you're asking there, which is, okay, how do I get a human shadow? And the solution is sort of what you're describing. Basically, what you do is you create a mesh of your character. You make that animate. You make that do things based on what you're doing, and you place that in the world in the real position where the first-person player character, if you're using like a Unity solution, like a first-person player character controller is, or if you're making your own, whatever, just basically in the right position in the world. So you're essentially living inside this mesh of a human character. I'm gesturing and moving around and running. That noise of fabric. Add the noise of fabric. That's very important. And then what you exactly. And the great thing is, meshes you can't see a mesh from the inside. Meshes have normals. This is taking in the whole 3D.
Now you're getting nerdy.
So a polygon has a normal. A normal is basically the direction that polygon is facing. It's a line pointing out from the top of the polygon. If you can see, if it's facing you, you can see it. If it's not facing you, you can't see it. You will have seen this whenever you've fallen through the ground in a game and the floor's not there. The reason the floor's not there is it is still there, but you're below it, and the normal of that surface points up, because you can see it when you're above the surface.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah, and you'll have seen it as well when you clip into things in World, or when the camera flies into a wall, the wall disappears. Partially, that's something now we kind of fake in clever ways, but generally it's just because meshes are not two-sided. It's not like cardboard. You can only see a mesh from the front. The second you're behind it, you can't see it. So if you put the player in this mesh, chances are they won't be able to see it. But it still can cast a shadow in the world and do its thing. Now, the problem there, because you can't stop there, you could stop there, and that would look pretty good.
Pierre, you started this.
Yeah.
You better be finishing it.
The problem, though, with that solution is that head is going to bob up and down, and chances are at some point it's going to kind of come out. So all you do there is you just make it so that mesh is seen by the lights and therefore cast shadow, but that you can't see it through the camera. Additional note, first person is also interesting in terms of what you do with the gun. So in a first person shooter, you're running around. Obviously, you're often running towards walls or in front of walls. What happens when you get towards a wall in a modern video game, modern first person shooter?
It goes up in your face.
It goes up, so kind of it plays an animation of it kind of angling up. Okay, what happens when you get closer to the wall once it's done that? Nothing, right?
Nothing.
Okay, if you think about it, that hand should disappear into the wall because you're right next to that wall. Why is that hand? How can you still see that hand? And the reason you can is because one of the first tricks of first-person shooters, and this dates back to Doom, is you never render the gun actually in the world. You're rendering it lit by the world, but you're rendering it on a separate camera layer. So you render the whole world, and then you render the gun hand on top of its own layer. So as you get closer to the wall, the hand isn't clipping through the wall because you're rendering them as two layers. Think of it as like 2 layers of acetate with the image on. The way to check that I'm not making this up is next time you're playing a first-person shooter, stand in front of a wall about 3 meters away from it and look at your gun and look at how big your gun looks compared to the wall. And then as you move closer to the wall, it'll look fine. And then as you get very close to the wall, your gun's going to suddenly look like it's really small. And that's because your eye is getting confused by the fact that the wall is there and the gun shouldn't be in front of the wall, but it's kind of going wrong.
If you have a burning question about games, game development, or just about the complexities of the universe, you can send those questions to us via contact@BithellGames.com. That's contact@BithellGames.com, through the YouTube comments of the show, or on Twitter by pinging @MikeBithell, @Slawinski, or our AI @VolumeGame. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please give us reviews and 5 stars on iTunes, likes and subscribes on YouTube, and positive reinforcement whenever possible on whatever platform you watch us on. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. We'll be back next week. I'll be back in the States, and yeah, we'll see if they let me back. I'm Alexander Slawinski. Thanks again, and get in the last word, Mike.
Nerd.